The views expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of their organizations or of Oracle or its affiliates.
When we talk about AI, we tend to focus on the technology and forget the outcome. But there's another side to this technology, how it can be used to tackle some of the world's most concerning problems. Human trafficking is one of the clearest examples. In this episode, we'll be discussing how AI can be applied to address that challenge. Hi everyone, my name's Neil Sholay, SVP for AI and Data at Oracle. I'm absolutely overjoyed to be joined today by Ruth Dearnley OBE, who is the president and founder of Stop the Traffik. Welcome, Ruth. Lovely to have you.
Great to be here. I'm really sorry that I'm not sitting in an air-conditioned room, but with you. But it's great to be part of the show.
Yeah, I should probably say, for the benefit of an audience who are not based in the UK, we're having a heat wave, aren't we, in the UK? So it's incredibly hot, isn't it, at the moment? And I'm lucky I'm in an air-conditioned studio. Okay.
Yeah.
Ruth, could you perhaps start by talking about Stop the Traffik? Because it's amazing what you do, but just describe the purpose, the mission, what you do, if you could, please.
So Stop the Traffik was an idea which was given birth to over a nice glass of red wine in 2005. And I mean, honestly, most great ideas happen when you don't expect them to, don't they? And we were great friends, busy day of meetings in the evening, and a conversation that evolved with a friend of mine, Steve Chalk, who had founded a charity 20 years before called Oasis. And the experience that him and his team had begun to have a number of years before was identifying something that was deeply disturbing. A small children's youth group in a dusty road in Mumbai. And it just meant that young children came during the day. And these two children, Winnie and Sunny, 6 and 8, always came every day until one day they stopped coming. And the amazing couple who ran this makeshift lifesaver of a children's group knew where the father lived. And they went to him on Mumbai train station and asked, Winnie and Sunny, they come every day. And what's happened to them? And at that point, he just calmly and briefly said he'd sold them for a bottle of wine. And that moment, always taking it back to that story for Steve gave birth to the concept that something was happening. Had it always happened? But something was happening that felt different, a shift in the ability to be open to sell your two children. So, over a glass of red wine, you have to choose your moment. The genius of any idea is to know when to birth it. And you have to find a moment, don't you, when you can take the oxygen. Because there's billions of good ideas every day, but if you're going to find the timing. This was 2005, and we were heading towards 2006-07, the 200-year anniversary of the abolition of transatlantic slavery. And there's a moment when we knew the narrative was going to be of mostly, yay, 200 years after the abolition. And it felt a very powerful and momentous moment to be able to make a noise, to make a big noise, to begin to say there should be no celebration. And if all those that fought 200 years ago were here today, they would be saying, we need to stop the traffic. So there's the very beginning. So many people over the last 20, 21 years have said to me, where's your blueprint? What was your master plan and everything? Actually, sometimes it is the concept, the moment, the idea. And I think Steve turned to me and said, I think you should do this with me. And I said, okay. And that's the moment where you commit, not knowing where it's going to lead to.
Yeah. And look where it has led you to. That is a very moving and amazing story. So now we sort of understand the genesis of Stop the Traffik. How do you go about doing that? Because there are 1,000 things you could do every day, but I'm sure you have to prioritize. Talk us through what you're doing day to day and how you're stopping it and what the impact is.
Well, I'm not going to take you through 20 years of history, but I will say that when I started and when we as a coalition, people began to gather round, I think we acted more in a way as a usual sort of campaign. You're building what I would term a sort of movement, because we thought if we can make a big noise in those first couple of year and a half around this 200-year anniversary about an issue that people weren't talking about, then that would be our job. And so we did a number of things, and I'm going to list them, and that will make them sound easy, but it nearly killed me. So we did launch Freedom Day on the actual 200-year anniversary. We went to events with 40, 50,000 people. We knew our network. We built tools, community sort of activities. I'm a teacher in my background. I also understand, I think, how community works. In the end, you want to throw this out to young people, especially because they don't form committees. They get on and do stuff. And we made it global. We put it on a website, which in 2005 was quite radical, because technology changes very fast. And this movement, we delivered a petition of 1.5 million signatures to the UN. We launched a global webcast out of the UN building in New York, translated into multiple languages around the world to engage and educate. We started a chocolate campaign because, Wilberforce had the issue of sugar during that campaign, was the game changer. Gandhi sold. I always say we got the best deal with chocolate. But again, utilizing the ability for people to understand what trafficking is. How does it affect me? And what can I do about it? And those three questions in those first 5, 10 years, we mobilized an energy and understanding, but it has to be about what people can do about it. In that journey, I encountered amazing people, which is why really, Neil, I'm sitting here. It's the people I've met and the understanding that if we can begin to look at trafficking, not just as a human rights issue, but it's a business. It's a business model, and it's ever so successful. So understanding the scale, over $500 billion a year in its making, over 50 million, and that's just the latest figure, of people being recruited and brought in. This is an extraordinary business that needs to do those three. It needs to recruit, it needs to move its money through the systems of the world, and it needs to sustain and grow demand.
But Ruth, it's interesting that you call this a business, because that's what it is, right? Businesses run on processes, structure, data, information. So how are you tracking this? How are you disrupting this?
There's the question. You've asked the question. My journey was, especially as I met people who were in the intelligence world, Neil Giles is the person, again, with whom I wouldn't be here. And I met him right early on, and he was senior in law enforcement and understood human intelligence, for senior global UK agencies. And I began to realize, very simple thing, you can't stop what you can't see. And trafficking, there were lots of people beginning to talk about the work they were doing, particularly in NGOs in those early days. Amazing people, Neil, amazing people. But the whole premise was that we needed to find the people who were trapped and give them rescue, give them rehabilitation, which is absolutely essential, but of no threat to the business model. Because this business model isn't interested in how many people get pulled out. because it can sustain its ability to generate upstream. And so Stop the Traffik was birthed in the soil of prevention. Stop the Traffik from its early day was, how do we mobilize communities, mobilize people to be able to build resilience to this issue? And my journey wasn't one thing and then another. It was an emerging road and pathway to understand and go deeper to answer those questions. And I realized two things. Number one, we were never going to be able to go upstream and understand how this business was working unless we could get everyone sharing what they knew. Because I was encountering everybody, banks, this is about money. So how do banks get included? How do banks become involved? Businesses, supply chains, recruitment, technology platforms, governments, policy, academia, community, faith networks, NGOs, law enforcement. And actually what I realized is everybody was stuck in a silo. Everybody, even when they're trying to encounter, don't work systemically, they work almost in competition, not just across sectors, but within a sector. You know, law enforcement, I learned, keep what I know to myself. You know, charities, I gave birth to one or two, but you keep what you know to yourself because it's your next funding bit. Businesses, banks, so this whole thing. So I began to understand we needed to change the system. We needed to change the way we work if we were going to go upstream. And we needed to use the tools of technology. Why? Because traffickers do. Traffickers are way ahead. This is organized criminality from, global stakeholders right down to local brokers. This is seriously organized crime. It has to be able to generate the success that it's built. Therefore, what if we could engage the same tools and build the same, if not better, trusted network across all those stakeholders than the traffickers were building? That would be our possibility that we could disrupt, prevent, and stop the traffic. So it was a sort of, I wouldn't say it was a moment. It was through meeting. How are we going to do it? And I'll make you smile here that I actually, in Stop the Traffik's board, one of my best friends was on the board because she'd come along and I said, would you join our board? And I turned up, I think in around 2012, we'd just done the big awareness program across the London Olympics. And I said, I think we need to build a data hub. Now, Neil, all your listeners are going to instantly understand what that was. I didn't really understand what that was. But I knew it was a safe space that we could bring. Everybody knew something, no one knew enough. Everyone held a bit of data, but it was not brought together. How could we build a rich picture? And so I said to the board, I think we need to build a data hub. And I don't know if I'm allowed to mention, I mentioned the name of the only tech company that I knew and began with an M. And I said, does anyone have a contact? And she paused and she said, well, hang on a minute, Ruth, because I actually remember work for IBM. And so let me go and see. So I'm painting you that moment because actually, again, glass of wine, let's do it. Let me go and talk to my bosses and see. And about 8 years later, we launched the first iteration of Traffik Analysis Hub in Washington with 250, 300 businesses, banks, government, because IBM had put a lot of pro bono work into building the first iteration. And the idea was if we could collect and move vital data, the right data, we could build a picture, make this business transparent, see how they recruit, see how they move money, and see how they're sustaining demand. And the whole idea of that is to use the very first tools of AI or, on this journey, because there was Watson at the time, and I know it goes back to the 1950s. I've done a bit of research around AI, but, it was an early iteration. Let's see if we can begin to see what data we can scrape, what data we can collect, what data we can share, and let's see what it shows us. And then here's the thing. We could create the best insights in the world, but if we didn't have a network again to share it to every single actor who could do something with that insight, whether it's a bank to freeze assets, proceeds of crime, know your customer, and embed that into their systems, businesses, every type of business, construction, logistics, law enforcement, and back into communities and upstream. I think I saw that you could truly disrupt this, because we are actually starting to work in a different way. And so there was the journey of giving birth to the Traffik Analysis Hub. But more than that, the community. I always say the data, everyone gets very excited about data, don't they? Everyone, data. And then in some ways, again, what data, which data, what data you need, what information. I always say it's about stories that you need to be able to pull in. The most vital are the stories of lived experience, those stories that are held. And then it's about, okay, now you know something, go and put it to work in the world.
My mind's spinning now, Ruth. One of my favorite books is a book called Talk Like Ted, and there's a really good line where it says stories are just data with a soul, right? You add that human element and suddenly it comes to life. So if I was to summarize, not only have you identified sources of data information that are critical to building this sort of insightful picture, you've convinced many of the owners of that data to sort of donate or provide access to that data. You've been able to get it together in the Traffik Analysis Hub, and now you have insight, okay? Which, by the way, I can tell you, there are Fortune 500 companies who still struggle today with that task. My question for you is, as you're building up this data hub, and you mentioned that word AI a few moments ago, so you have insight, but the holy grail is foresight, right? How can you see what's going to happen before it's happened? How far are you towards achieving that ability to almost model, do what if scenarios and predict, so you can disrupt before something's happened? Where are you in that part?
Yeah, I mean, there's my dream. And I think what are we doing now? We are achieving the ability to see, for example, we're working at the moment around the World Cup in the US. So we're on the brink. I don't know when, this program goes, but we're on the brink, aren't we, of the World Cup. And what an incredible business opportunity for traffickers. So, we know sports events, trafficking happens before them and after them. Okay. But at an event, what you have is a spike in demand, so anything that that you can begin to sell, sexual exploitation, sexual services, or if you're building very large stadiums ahead of a major sports event, you can use exploited labor. Okay, so there's always events and things that will drive demand. So in working there, our aim this time, because we've tracked different sports events and worked understanding the intelligence, learning every time from Paris last year. So we actually, with the capacity we had, we began to realize by tracking prices. Okay, so prices for buying sex went steadily up, and the age being sold came steadily down. So you begin to understand this is a business. How is this business modeling and reacting to the demand that's being laid there? So we took those learnings and we are working actually very focused in Philadelphia and some other cities. And we are seeing, because we've learned, some really interesting insights. We have, we can report on exploitative ads. We can see that they are coming from particular platforms and channels. We can also see they're going through legitimate job websites. And we can begin to see how, this is no surprise to anyone who does business, if you're a trafficker, you don't just use one platform, you network them across. So if you start to see prices or wages or mobiles or all the data that's relevant that you need to be able to identify, you can start to map a network. And we're actually doing that purposefully for the World Cup, because there are 90 matches in multiple cities. So I don't think traffickers have had a sports event with quite as much potential profit ever for a long time across 3 countries. So working with the actors, with the banks, with the communities in terms of going upstream, particularly in Philly, we're going to do an awareness around vulnerable people groups, and with businesses. So again, always touch. If you know something, give it to everybody so everyone starts to learn how to do something with it. So back to your question, I'm going to be really honest. My dream, I've always said, has to be to predict. I think we're nudging it. We're nudging into that space because, there's many a moment where you want to restrict someone being able to continue to perpetrate and traffic someone. You want someone who has come out of it not to go back into it. So prevention all the way through. And prevention and rescue are not enemies or opposites. They're 2 sides of one coin. But my commitment and vision for Stop the Traffik was that we can measure what didn't happen. And for the last 3 years in our impact report, we have actually audited evidence that we have prevented over 5,000 people being trafficked. And that's the first time everyone's done that. And again, I think, too many people said you can't do that. You can. And we're doing it in a sense because that is people who have directly contacted us through our prevention programs, through reaching people, over 30 million upstream in the last 8 or 9 years. But 5,000 people who actually we can say did not get trafficked means we're beginning to prevent.
Amazing. What you've described in the world of enterprise would be called the autonomous enterprise, right? Where you have the ability not just to predict, but AI would go and do things on your behalf. It would take that piece of information, that insight, put it in the hands of the person that needs it. And that would have a profound impact on your ability to go from 5,000 to 10 to 20 to 50,000. And what I find interesting is the technology absolutely exists to do that today, right? And you've also cracked one very, very big half of the problem, which is you have the data. You've organized that data. So to apply intelligence to it would just be like a force multiplier for you. So I wish you luck with that dream. In fact, I'm trying to figure out ways that we can help you do that, actually, as we're speaking. Look, Ruth, just switching a little bit. There'll be people sitting here watching, enjoying hearing the story and wondering, how did you end up on this journey? I mean, what is your background? Did you have a whole career before you were president and founder of Stop the Traffik?
The journey.
I mean, I think the great joy everyone will just hear is I'm not a technologist. I'm not an intelligence expert. And actually, to be honest, I thought my greatest dream when I was 10 was to be a Blue Peter presenter. And that's probably not even a show that anyone on this show needs to even know. But I started life, I'm from Liverpool. I'm a Liverpool girl. And my dad is a scientist and my mum was an amazing community worker. And I think those two things, actually, when I look back, and it's a weird thing, isn't it? My dad is a nuclear physicist, but an incredible creative um, uh, um, being and mind. And my mum just understood people, community. You know, if you had a problem, you come to my mum's door. I think those two things have to coexist, especially when you're having a conversation about futures of technologies. And then when I think how that sort of came through, I was a teacher. I did a law degree, Neil, but I mean, I wanted to be Grace Allen off LA Law. That's another show no one will know about, but she was incredible. You know, when I watched her, this American law show, but Grace stood out for me because she stood and took the underdog and walked around the courtroom and changed something, made people listen where things mattered, soul matters, how we treat each other, the ability and belief that the world can be inclusive, that those who are vulnerable need to be given access to information to be able to make choices to their lives. And I had deep-rooted values and views that were put in by my upbringing, by my journey of faith. But I can't articulate. Then I did a law degree. I wasn't very good at it. And then I realised that the law system and being a barrister over here wasn't quite like LA law. And you had to actually pay to go to dinners. Would you believe it? Now, I'm quite old, but they've only just, you had to pay to go to 3 dinners to know someone who would give you, you know, pupillage. And there you go. My first campaign, I made a placard, got my 4 friends and wrote on it, "Down with the dinners," and walked around the law society, and no one took a blind bit of notice. But there's something about me. Okay, so that took me. I always look back over my shoulder and think, well, I didn't become a barrister, but I do speak. I am someone who I think does that sort of role in a different way. Went to the East End, trained to be a teacher, and I loved it. It taught me so much. I learned more there than I ever gave from the people I work with, the families, the area. Loved it. And then did a variety of things, sort of had children, young kids. And then the fateful red wine glass where, 2005. And I honestly never thought that I'd be here, because I think all of us we are trying to find purpose, aren't we? All of us. I mean, and we can find it in all sorts of different ways. But I think for me, there was a moment that I knew there'd be something that would pull the ability, the teaching, the belief in communities, the education. And so that took me step by step in the last 21 years to where I am. But actually, it's not my skill that has brought Stop the Traffik to being born. It's the people I have brought around, because it is about having the best who are actually in a common purpose to stop the traffic. And so, that there is the best technology and intelligence. And
Ruth, if I may say, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. There is a skill in identifying passionate, talented people and bringing them together. And you clearly have it, okay? And getting them to work towards that one common purpose is an amazing achievement. So well done, well done.
I think the other thing, Neil, that's strange is I think also I see the future early. So going back to AI. So I'm not a technologist, but obviously you learn. I'm a generalist. You learn by sitting around people who are amazing, or going into environments where the gift is just being in the room and listening and learning and talking to people, whether it's about the future of crypto or the future of AI, or how to build platforms, or AI, agents, or how financial systems are changing, or law enforcement and the challenges, or the economics. And I think it is about being able to see a future that can be different. And so in my very simple space, it is about if we could collect, analyze, and then share, that is the system of disruption. And actually the only way we're ever going to do that is by using technology. That's it, because it made scale possible. And the sort of stage we're at now, I think we've got a really good engine running, but we need scale.
You need scale, yeah. Again, I find it interesting. You say you're not a technologist, but just that phrase you use, collect, analyze, share, that is a well-proven technique that is used in sort of data architecture by technology businesses, right? And you've applied it, or maybe just come across it from a different angle and are doing the same thing. But you say you're not a technologist, but you are using these technology concepts very, very successfully. But I think you're right when it comes to scale. So, you've spoken about the future. There's this wonderful phrase, force multipliers and scale. What is it going to take for Stop the Traffik to be able to hit that level of scale? Is it access to funding? Is it resources? More technology? Is it finding more of these bright people? You got a magic wand. What is it that you need?
I think we've got about 3 or 4 really strong, you call them maybe pilots. They're bigger than pilots. They're working models. One is across the UK, and we've just had a force multiplier of a good injection of some funding to scale that, which is looking at disrupting child exploitation. So I'm just giving you, that's exciting. The other, testing in the US around the data for the World Cup using a city model. So you need different settings, different models that are producing results. Because to me, the whole thing's useless unless you can measure impact. What was the impact? How much money could we take out of the system? How many people were not recruited? How did we disrupt demand? Which is the harder one. So, and then we're also working in Ireland, just to give you, over the last 5 years, with a whole group of banks working together. So I can give you, there's some real strong working models. What does it take when trafficking happens everywhere? Okay. How do you apply the learning and target it where? At the most vulnerable, or the places you can get the best results? And this, to me, is about routes and hotspots, which we've always talked about, a city model that could be replicated, principles that could go anywhere. What are the critical features? As long as we've built the capability that allows people to say, yes, if they go, we'll share what we've got. Well, we've got something that you can put it into. We need the best tools, don't we? Because the tools are changing all the time. And you said, what's my dream? My dream is a round table with technology companies. We work the social media platforms. We work with them all. I want them all to work together. We could honestly disrupt trafficking, not just in our lifetime, because we have the tools. And we can expose the money. We can find it. We can shut down things. We can. We are already showing evidence that banks and recruitment platforms and work agencies and companies are saying to us the insights you're giving us are game changing, because we're putting them into our system, and it's lighting up risk, and so we can do things with them. So it is not about Stop the Traffik, building an empire, because empires come and go. It is about the ability to build a network of networks, and the power of the insights that we've got. One, it's only as good as the reach it can have. Technology can make that reach happen. If it's network of networks, take it and say, well, we'll share it. it's not just those banks, or it's not just banks here, but let's share it across Asia and here and here. And then there's, how do we create more insights? And that then is targeted places which actually, again, scale the disruption. I think it's perfectly possible. I think if you'd have said 10 years ago, how would you stop a pandemic? Be a bit theoretical. I did a lot of study looking at health, along the way, because health is ahead. It doesn't mean that you don't have to fight it continuously, but we saw what it was when people shared what they knew, created and inoculated. We are trying to inoculate communities who are at risk of trafficking, whether they're financial, local, young, old, business, commercial. So I think we have the biggest opportunity. We just need to gather around a round table with no sharp edges.
That's a rallying call there, I think, Ruth. Technology providers, platform providers, data providers come together, find a way to work together to inoculate the communities. I love that phrase. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to switch a little bit now, and we're going to do a quick fire round, just a bit of fun. I'm going to ask you 5 or 6 questions. It's timed for around 30 seconds, but don't worry if you run out of time. And the idea is don't think too much. Just answer whatever comes into your head. All right.
Definition dash.
All right. First question. Here we go. One word for AI today.
Essential.
Very good. One word for AI in 5 years.
Normal.
No. Oh, that's a great one. AI agents, are they real or is it a hype?
It's real. I mean, I would love to. There's a real example that we're wanting to build, a chatbot. I'm only going to tell you this, to embed into our prevention programs. And that's because often if you're a victim, if you are trapped in this, you actually don't sometimes want to talk to a human being. You want to talk to a bot. And so there's real potential if you can get them in the right place, because it's then the synergy between human interaction. And I think that's something very special, rather than it being either or. It has to be both. But anyway, you can talk to me, because I've got a view on human soul and technology. It's both and.
That's really interesting, actually. I know it broke the flow, but it was a really interesting story. The biggest risk in AI right now?
I think it's just it's too busy. We can be too busy that we don't see what we're meant to be seeing. Ask the right questions. We could drown in it, couldn't we, of the hype, rather than using it as the tool.
As a tool, okay. One thing leaders consistently get wrong, and I mean when using technology and things like data and AI.
Well, I suppose coming from me, and you've been very kind to me about, mine, I think, and this goes to everybody in every walk of life, but particularly with AI and tech, is we've got to find a language that just makes sense. We have to talk about it in a way that's accessible to people, particularly people who aren't the experts around the table, because they've got a special place and they hear it. What about just people who are going to use it or be used by it? And so we have to find ways of telling stories that make sense so people can grab it in their hands and make it work for them.
Last question on this topic. I think I kind of know what your answer is going to be. So the theme for this video series is AI changes everything, okay? But is there one thing that AI shouldn't change, in your opinion?
I mean, we're always going to need the human and the human soul. And it's not that.
Yeah, I'm smiling, Ruth, because I've asked this question in every interview, and every person, without exception, has said the same thing. Never lose the human aspect. And as someone that lives, eats, and sleeps, breathes AI, I passionately believe that. So I think you're absolutely spot on. Okay.
AI prompt of the week.
Is there a tip or particular prompt or something that you use AI for in your working day that you'd like to share with the audience?
I have regularly in the work workplace used it to say, here's all my notes or things that I just randomly write down. And could you just make that an ordered summary? But I have become now really quite adept to pressing on my mobile and asking every single question when anyone asks me. And the kids think that I've almost got, Siri, how many hours is it going to take for me to get da da da? And they go, Mum, you've become absolutely addicted to this thing. So there you go.
Excellent. Well, look, we could talk for hours on this. And I think at some point when you have more time, I'd love to get you here physically in the studio, and we'll continue this discussion and maybe bring in a few of these technology companies so we could get them there and ask them some questions and get them to work alongside you. But I've really, really enjoyed the time speaking with you. I hope you have too, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Neil, for having me. And thank you to all of those who are going to listen, who are brilliant at what you do. And it is because of you that I think I have deep hope that we can stop the traffic. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you once again for your time. I hope to meet you in person someday soon. And for anyone watching, if you want to watch more interviews like this, I encourage you to go to oracle.com/AI changes everything. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.